My husband Arthur laughed at me in front of his entire family on a Sunday afternoon in October. And that laugh, that specific sound, low and dismissive, like I had said something charmingly naive, stayed with me for a long time afterward. Longer than it should have. Longer than I ever admitted to anyone. We were at his brother Edmund's house in Oakville for Thanksgiving. 12 people around a table that was too small. Wine glasses touching elbows. The smell of roasted turkey and Edmund's wife Pauline's cranberry sauce that she made every year from scratch. Someone had asked me. I think it was Arthur's mother, Eleanor, who has always been kind. What I had been keeping myself busy with since retiring from the school board. I told them I had been working on something. A small catering business. Homestyle cooking, comfort food. The kind of meals I'd spent 30 years making for our family. And for every potluck, every church fundraiser. Every bake sale at our son's school. Arthur smiled into his wine glass. Then he laughed. "Dorothy's going to become a businesswoman," he said, not unkindly, the way you'd say something about a child who announces they want to be an astronaut. At 63. A few people smiled. Nobody disagreed with him. The conversation moved on. I looked down at my plate and said nothing. I had learned, over 41 years of marriage to Arthur Pemberton, that some moments are not worth the dinner they'd ruin. So I picked up my fork, and I ate my turkey, and I let the conversation flow around me like water around a stone, and I held that laugh somewhere in my chest, where it became something else entirely. Not anger, not quite yet. Something quieter, a decision. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened next, because this story will not make sense if you don't understand where I was standing when it started. My name is Dorothy Pemberton, and I am 64 years old. I was a school administrator for 27 years, most of them at a secondary school in Burlington, Ontario. I managed budgets of over $2 million. I coordinated staff of 60-plus people. I ran the kind of operation that looks invisible when it works and catastrophic when it doesn't. Then I retired at 62. Because Arthur suggested it. Because our granddaughter was born and someone could help our son James and his wife with childcare. And because I thought, genuinely believed, that the next chapter of my life might be quieter and sweeter and shared. Arthur runs Pemberton Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm he built from nothing in the early 90s. I am proud of what he built. I was there when he built it. I typed his first proposals at our kitchen table. I answered calls when his assistant was sick. I entertained clients at dinners. I planned and cooked and managed while also working full-time and raising 2 boys. I never asked for credit. I never asked for credit because that is not how our generation was raised to think about marriage. You were a team. You did what needed doing. You didn't keep score. I should have kept score. The catering idea had started small. My friend Beverly Aronson, who I've known since our boys were in kindergarten together, told me I should charge for my food. She'd been saying it for years. After I brought lemon squares to a community fundraiser, and 3 separate people asked where they'd been bought, Beverly sat across from me with her cup of tea and said, "Dorothy, you are leaving money on the table every single time you cook." I started making calls in January. Quietly, I registered the business name, Pemberton Table, through Service Ontario online one Tuesday morning while Arthur was at the office. Feeling slightly ridiculous and slightly electric, I ordered business cards. I reached out to a woman I knew through the school board, Irene Nakashima, who ran a small events company in Hamilton, and had mentioned once, years ago, that she was always looking for reliable caterers for corporate luncheons. Irene remembered me. She called back the same day. "Dorothy," she said, "if your food is half as good as I remember from that retirement luncheon you organized for Principal Kowalski in 2019, we have a lot to talk about." I told Arthur about Irene's call over dinner. He nodded in the way that means he is thinking about something else. He asked what I was planning to charge. When I told him, he suggested I'd priced it too low, which I thought meant he was taking it seriously. But then he said, "Although I suppose it doesn't matter much at this scale," and went back to his phone. At this scale. I thought about those 3 words for several days. My son James was cautiously supportive. He is 38, careful with his opinions, the kind of man who researches things before he forms views. He asked me about liability insurance and whether I'd looked into the cottage food exemption rules in Ontario. His wife Melissa was warmer, She squeezed my arm and said she'd share my Instagram page when I had one, and she meant it. My younger son, Patrick, said, "Mum, obviously you should do this. Why are you even asking?" Which made me laugh and also made my eyes sting a little. Arthur's reaction to Irene's first booking was, "That's a nice little project for you." He kissed my cheek and went to bed. Nice little project. I lay in the dark that night and I thought about 41 years. I thought about the proposals I typed. I thought about the clients I charmed at dinner parties I organized. I thought about the conference in Calgary in 1998 where Arthur's biggest account, a firm called Hartley Group, had almost walked. And I had spent 2 hours talking to the wife of the CEO, a quiet woman named Anne, finding out that she collected first editions and had a daughter at UBC and missed her garden back in Vancouver. By the end of that dinner, Anne had decided she liked us, and Hartley Group had not walked, and Arthur had never connected those two facts explicitly. I never pointed it out. I started pointing things out, in my own head, that winter. Irene's first booking was a corporate luncheon for 40 people at a law firm in downtown Hamilton. I made chicken marsala, a wild rice pilaf, roasted asparagus, and 3 kinds of dessert. I borrowed Beverly's van. I hired my neighbor's daughter Kezia, 22, culinary school dropout, fast and precise and cheerful, to help me plate and serve. We pulled it off without a single hitch. The firm's office manager, a brisk woman named Margaret T., found me while I was packing up and pressed a card into my hand. "They want to do this quarterly," she said, "and our partner's holiday dinner in December. Are you available?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. That night I came home at 8:30 tired, in a way that felt entirely different from tired, the way your body feels after it's done something real. Arthur was watching hockey. He looked up and said, "How'd it go?" "Really well," I said. "Good," he said, and looked back at the screen. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the table where I had once typed his proposals, and I thought, I am going to build something. What happened in March is the part of this story I still find difficult to talk about. I had been keeping Pemberton Table's finances in a shared account. The joint account Arthur and I had maintained our whole marriage. It was simpler. My expenses came out. My income came in. Everything visible. I had no reason to hide anything. I noticed it first in February. A transfer out that I didn't recognize. Not large, $800, categorized vaguely as a business expense. I assumed it was something Arthur had run through the wrong account. We had done that before, mixing personal and his business costs by accident. I mentioned it to him. He said he'd look into it. In March there were 3 more, totaling just under $4,000, all with the same vague categorization. All on days when I had received payments from clients. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt when I understood what was happening, because I am not a dramatic woman by nature, and I do not want to perform emotions I did not actually feel. What I felt was cold, very still and very cold, the way you go quiet when something confirms a fear you didn't know you'd been carrying. I called our bank. I made an appointment with a financial advisor I'd seen once before. A woman named Stacy Okonkwo at the TD branch on Brant Street. I brought printed statements. Stacy looked at them for a long time. "Dorothy," she said carefully, "I think you need to speak to someone about separating these accounts. And possibly someone else as well." I knew what she meant by someone else. I drove home and I did not confront Arthur, not yet. I drove to Beverly's house instead. And I sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything. And Beverly, who has known me for 34 years and knows exactly when to say something and when to say nothing, made tea and put her hand over mine and said, "What do you need?" "I need to protect what I've built," I said. I opened a business account the next day. Pemberton Table was now entirely separate. I updated my client invoicing details. I said nothing to Arthur for 3 weeks because I was not ready, and because I wanted to be standing on solid ground when I had that conversation, not standing in midair. In that same period, Irene referred me to a colleague of hers, a woman named Frances Beaumont, who coordinated events for a consortium of medical clinics across the Hamilton-Halton region. Frances was efficient and specific, and not at all easy to impress, which meant when she called me back after a tasting and said, "I want to put you on retainer for 6 events over the next year," I understood it was real. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the clinic on Upper James Street, and I let myself cry for exactly 4 minutes. Then I blew my nose, fixed my face in the rearview mirror, and called Kezia to tell her I needed her to start working regularly. The conversation with Arthur happened on a Wednesday evening in April. I had made dinner, salmon, which he likes, and I had set the table properly, which I hadn't done for a weeknight in a while. He noticed. He sat down and looked at me. "You want to talk about something," he said. "I do," I said. I showed him the statements. I asked him directly. I used the word fraud, not to be cruel, but because I had spent 3 weeks choosing my words and that was the accurate one, and I have always believed that accuracy matters. His face went through several things. Denial first, a reflexive, almost automatic denial. Then something shifting. Then something that looked, for a moment, like shame. He said he had been using those transfers to cover a shortfall in the firm. Pemberton Solutions had lost 2 mid-sized accounts in late fall. He hadn't told me. He had been managing it quietly, he said, the way he managed everything, and the joint account had seemed like. He paused here and said something I will remember for the rest of my life. I didn't think it would matter. I didn't think it was going to amount to much. Pemberton table. My business. He didn't think it would amount to much. I asked him to leave the table. I told him I was not going to make any large decisions that night, but that I needed him to understand that what he had done was not a mistake. It was a choice. He had made it because he had looked at what I was building and decided it was not serious enough to warrant the same respect he'd give any other financial entity, and I needed him to sit with that. He did leave the table. He went to his office. I finished my salmon because I had made it, and it was good, and I was not going to let this ruin my dinner. James called me 2 weeks later. He had been talking to his father. Arthur had told him some version of events, and James was quiet on the phone for a moment before he said, "Mum, I owe you an apology, too." I asked him what for. "I treated what you were doing like a hobby," he said. "When you told me about Irene's first booking, I asked about insurance. I didn't ask how it felt. I didn't ask if you needed help." Patrick was right. I should have just said, "Obviously, you should do this." I'm sorry it took me this long to see it clearly. I had to put the phone down for a moment. Not because I was angry. Because I wasn't, and I hadn't expected not to be. And sometimes the thing that brings you to tears is not the wound but the unexpected bandage. "You're seeing it now," I said, when I picked the phone back up. "That's enough!" James started following Pemberton Table on Instagram the next day. Then he sent me a message. "I've been telling everyone at work about you. My colleague's wife is organizing a fundraising gala for the Hamilton Health Sciences Foundation. I gave them your number. I hope that's okay." It was okay. Gail Whitford called me on a Tuesday morning. She was on the organizing committee for the gala, April, 500 guests. The convention center on King William. She was professional and a little harried, and she wanted to know if I could handle volume at that scale. I told her about the Hamilton law firm luncheons, about Francis Beaumont's retainer, about the holiday dinner at the law firm that had gotten a standing ovation from 47 lawyers, which is not a group known for giving those out easily. Gail laughed. She said, "Can you come in for a meeting?" I said yes. I should tell you about that meeting, because it is the part of this story where I started to understand that something had actually shifted, not just in my circumstances, but in myself. Gail met me in a boardroom at the convention center with 2 colleagues. One of them, a man named Robert, asked about our maximum capacity. I answered directly. Current capacity of 120 covers, scaling to 250 with additional staffing, which I was prepared to contract. He made a note. He did not look surprised, or charmed, or amused. He looked like a man talking to a business person. I drove home with the windows down even though it was only 11 degrees. The contract for the gala was signed in early May. It was, by a significant margin, the largest single contract Pemberton Table had ever taken. I am not going to put a number here because some things feel private, but I will tell you that when I told Beverly, she put down her tea, stared at me for a moment, and said, "Dorothy! I know," I said. "Does Arthur know?" "Not yet," I said. He found out through James, actually, not through me. James mentioned the gala in conversation, and Arthur called me that evening. He was quiet, on the phone in a way I recognized. The way he goes quiet when he is recalibrating, when something has not matched his internal model of how things would go. "James tells me you've taken on a pretty substantial event," he said. "I have," I said. "The Hamilton Health Sciences Gala." Yes, a pause. Dorothy, that's another pause. That's a significant contract. It is, I said. He said, I'm proud of you. I want to be fair to Arthur here because fairness matters to me, and because 41 years means something even when it is complicated. I believe he meant it. I believe that in that moment he was genuinely feeling something that was pride, or something close to it. But I also heard, underneath it, the particular tone of a man who is surprised. And the surprise was the thing I sat with afterward, because it told me everything about what he had assumed. I had not started Pemberton Table to prove something to Arthur. I want to be clear about that. I started it because Beverly said you're leaving money on the table, and I knew she was right, and I was 63 years old, and I had spent enough of my life being reasonable about what was possible. But I will not pretend that his surprise did not mean something. It did. The gala was in the second week of April, a Thursday evening. I arrived at the convention center at noon with Kezia and 3 other staff I had contracted for the event. All of them capable, all of them calm. Kezia running the kitchen side with the kind of quiet authority that I recognized because I had spent 27 years in a building full of it. We set up for 5 hours. I walked the floor at 6 o'clock before the doors opened, and I thought, we did this. The evening was not perfect. One of the warming units ran low and we had to adjust. A guest with a dietary restriction that hadn't been noted in advance needed an improvised alternative. These things happen. We handled them, quickly and without drama, the way you handle things when you have spent a career managing operations where something always needs improvising. Gail found me near the end of the evening. She looked like someone who had just finished running a marathon and won it. Dorothy, she said, my committee chair wants to talk to you. The committee chair was a woman named Patricia Drummond, which I mention only because Patricia Drummond is on the board of 4 different organizations in Hamilton, and what she said to me that night was, I'd like your card. We have 3 events next fiscal year that I think you're the right fit for. I gave her my card. My hands were completely steady. Arthur and I are still married. I want to say that plainly because I know it's what you're wondering, and I think you deserve a direct answer. We are still married, and it is not a simple thing, and I would not describe it as healed, but I would describe it as in progress. Arthur has done the work of actually looking at what happened. Not just the financial piece, but the pattern underneath it, the 30 years of not quite seeing what was in front of him. He is 67 years old, and he is learning, which I find both moving and occasionally exhausting, as learning usually is. Pemberton Solutions, I should mention, had a difficult year. They've stabilized now, but the 2 accounts they lost did real damage, and the recovery has been slower than Arthur had expected. He has not said anything directly about the comparison. He doesn't need to. We both know the numbers. Patrick came over last month for dinner, just the 3 of us, and at some point during the meal he said, Mom, I want to ask you something. He looked at his father and then at me. When you started, did you actually believe it would work? Or did you just decide to try regardless? I thought about it honestly. I believed I had already been doing this work for 40 years without it being called work, I said. So I suppose I believed that if I just called it what it was, other people would too. Patrick nodded slowly. Arthur was quiet. Then Arthur said, without looking up from his plate, I should have called it what it was a long time ago. It was the closest thing to an apology that was also an understanding, not just of what he'd done in March, but of all of it. The wine glass at Thanksgivings, the nice little project that didn't think it would amount to much. I didn't say anything, neither did Patrick. We just sat there for a moment, the 3 of us, with the particular quality of silence that means something real has just been acknowledged. Then Patrick said, Is there more salmon? And we all laughed, and I got up to get it. I am 64 years old. I run a catering company that is booked 4 months in advance. I have a staff of 7, 2 of them part-time, and Kezia is now my kitchen manager, a title she earned, and that I gave her without hesitation. Beverly comes to tasting sometimes and sits at my counter and tells me honestly if something doesn't work, which is a form of love I've come to rely on. I did not start Pemberton Table to become someone different. I started it because I had always been this person. Capable, organized, skilled, serious, and for a very long time those qualities had been the water that other things swam in. Invisible, essential, unnamed. I named it. That's all. I named it, and registered it, and printed business cards, and showed up, and kept showing up, even when the person who had known me longest laughed at the idea that I could. He's not laughing now. And I find, honestly, that I don't need him not to laugh in order to feel like I've won something. What I needed was always simpler than that. I just needed to know that I could build something real, something that stood on its own, something that had my name on it. Pemberton table. Mine. That's enough.